tuition obviously is a part of private education, but there are so many other things that will make it up. The books, the rulers, the bags, the uniforms, and all these kinds of things, and so on. These items, which were previously zero rated, these educational items that were previously zero rated, have been moved in their entirety to exempt. You have to really appreciate what we're trying to say here. These items that were zero rated, right, meaning that the tax would have been in it, and if you were VAT registered, you could reclaim, the business could reclaim the VAT, all right, as a refund from it. But now we don't have to do that. There's no VAT in these items. And I want to read a range of these items that are under education that don't attract any VAT anymore. Before I do that though, let me tell you, in 2016, those private schools that were registered for the VAT collected $150 million in refunds last year alone. Okay? This probably would not mean anything to you except to say that, remember, when the school would have bought the item, it had in VAT. And then they sold the parents the item that included VAT. So if I bought an excise book for $1 and it had in 16 cents in it, I would probably have sold it to the parent for maybe $1.20. So it has in the 16. Okay? Then I will go to GRA and say, look, you know, those excise books that I bought, here's the receipt and so on, here's the VAT I paid. Can you please give me back my VAT? And GRA will check, verify, so on, and will give back the 16 cents to the school. But wait a minute, did the school give back the 16 cents to the parent? I can't say, I don't go to the schools, you know, but it's up to you to investigate that aspect of it, really. But now, under this regime, no 16 cents will be in the excise book. So the book now should cost 84 cents, all things being equal. And if you want to sell to the parent, no, maybe you could sell for $1. You get a little small piece, but not 120. I don't know how that has taken place since. I figured that nothing has changed in terms of prices, even though these items are now exempt from paying any VAT, as opposed to being zero rated, so to speak. So among the items that are paying no VAT, chalk, chalkboard eraser, children's drawing books, children's picture books, children's story books, coloring books, crayons, dictionaries, dividers and compasses, educational charts, erasers, exercise books, file paper, loose and three-hold, geometry sets, graph books and graph paper, handheld pencil sharpeners, instructional newspapers or newsletters, lunch kits, lunch packs, lunch bags, maps, globes and atlases, music manuscripts, notebooks, spiral, bound, and so on, novels, pencils, recipe books, religious books, rulers, scientific calculators, simple protractors used by students, students' paints in tablets, tubes, jars, bottles, sets or in similar packages, and all textbooks. These are all exempt from paying any VAT, so to speak.
And computers.
And well, of course, computers. Right. These weren't under education materials, but they were under general. But computers are also exempt from paying VAT. So those are the items that do not attract VAT. The only thing that attracts the VAT in relation to private education is the private tuition. Now, let me give you some facts on this aspect of it, because as the president has said and we had said, this was an organizing issue. But as I'm going to reiterate, in the context of broadening the tax base, no area was essentially was exempted. And then we begin to write down areas where we feel the common person, the ordinary person, would be affected negatively if the VAT was there. That is why when you look at the list of exempt items for foods and other areas, the whole range of food items there that are exempt. If you compare that list, for example, with the list of our neighbor back there, you'll see how generous we have been. This narrative that has been created about private tuition, VAT on private tuition, has allowed us to really look more closely at private schools generally. And what we have found somewhat, I find to be a bit startling. Some you know it existed, but you never really bothered. And it's perhaps even more startling than we would have seen. But essentially, all we have at GRA is 54 schools that are registered. There are far more of these schools, but only 54 are registered with GRA. Now, before you ask GRA why they've been lazy or recalcitrant in not going after them, I think the commissioner has his answers prepared when you begin to ask him that. And of those, according to GRA, those 54 schools represent just 57% of what essentially they think are private schools in Guyana. Of those 54 schools, only 20%, and I think in today's papers they accurately had the figure 11. Only 20% or 11 are recognized by the Ministry of Education, and whereas the rest just are operating, so that is not a Ministry of Finance issue. All the GRA could do is collect taxes from any business activity. The business of registering and so on will have to do with Ministry of Education. 10% of those schools are registered as not-for-profit organizations. 10% of them. Is it the 20? 10% of the 54?
10% of the 54.
The 54 schools, which is just six. Roughly five to six of them are registered as not-for-profit. Now, the Commissioner General is going to give you a bit more on what it means to be a not-for-profit school. All right, but my initial comment will be a not-for-profit school doesn't mean that you don't make a profit. All right, so it's a kind of misnomer, but a not-for-profit school don't necessarily not make a profit, or any organization, to be quite honest. You have to make a profit to regenerate, to grow, and so on and so on. But there are rules, I believe, as to what this profit that you make, what you can do with it, and whether it can be distributed or not distributed, and what's the limit of the profit that you can make, and so on and so forth. So he will deal with that. 26% of the schools are registered for VAT, and they have already been applying for this VAT. So that is how last year's was 150 million. So those schools will be, those 26% of those schools will be applying for the VAT, which means the rest of the schools are not VAT compliant. Now, that will mean that they're earning, as of last year, less than 10 million in everything, in income, which will be a little difficult to comprehend, which means then that they were flouting the law, so to speak. Right. What it was found that a number of these schools offer competitive rates of fees ranging from $144,000 per annum to $300,000 per annum, depending on the grade level of the school. As you can immediately see, almost all these schools, even at the bottom, are literally charging more fees than you will pay at University of Guyana for a social science course. Their recent increase would have put them, I think, at how much is it, 165, 160, 160. So 144,000. I can tell you that at a certain private school at the grade, well, I don't know what grade it is. It's nursery, I think it is. The fee is 165,000 a year, and that's just the tuition fee. Yeah, just at the nursery. These are the 4-year-olds and the 5-year-olds. Yeah, the fee is 165,000 a year.
30,000 a month.
Right, or 55. Well, I don't know if 13 a month. It's 55,000 a term. It's 5,000 a term. If you divide it by 3, now it's more than 13 a month. That's a term is 55,000 and about 3 months. 3 months in a term.
18,000.
You're talking about 18,000 a month, essentially. You know. By the way, I'm not knocking any school on their fees. I'm just merely stating a fact. I would not do that. It's a private business, and private businesses are entitled to charge whatever they feel the market can bear. Right? It's up to the purchasers of the service to determine whether they will purchase the service or not. But I'm not going to knock any private institution as relates to their fee setting. This is an interesting statistic. The top 8 of these private institutions have income in excess of $2 billion a year. So 14% on only in the top 8 will give us roughly $300 million on VAT. Yeah, this is, the top 8 institutions in Guyana, private school institutions that are registered with the GRA, earn fees in excess of $2 billion a year. All right? This is something we knew, and that's why we were putting the VAT, because we know how much we will expect from the VAT if we put the 14% on it. But a quick calculation of 14% of $2 billion will give you $280 million. That's just on the top 8 schools alone. So, now of course I said they don't pay any fees on, certainly they don't have to pay any tax on books and so on and so forth, but that everybody who goes to these schools will recognize that tuition fees doesn't mean anything as it relates to uniform, coaching fees, lessons, lunch, aftercare, you name it, whatever else you may have had to pay. That's just your basic standard tuition. But again, as I said, it's of no interest to me, because once you would have made a choice to send your kid there, then you have to bear the expenditure that the school is requesting, really. Another thing we need to, well, of course I told you most of these institutions are not tax compliant. And what do we mean by tax compliant? A, they do not submit, almost all do not submit returns for the employees. In fact, what they do is tell the employee that they are contracted and they're responsible for their PAYE and the NIS. They don't submit returns. They don't submit employers' returns. They don't file income tax returns for the business, and they don't file property tax returns for the business. I will say it clearly that even if you have the status of a not-for-profit organization, under the law you must file annual returns of income and property taxes. You're not exempt. You're exempt from paying income tax and property tax, but you're not exempt from filing your returns, so to speak. And part of the enforcement and reforms at GRA will be enforcing the law as it relates to these institutions. As I said, the Commissioner General will be able to indicate something more. Also, of course, in very rare instances where the school may sponsor a teacher or so for training, almost all the teachers come from the public school, from the public education system, as you well know, because most of the teachers would have gone to CP Cyril Potter and University of Guyana. And those institutions, as you know, in the case of Cyril Potter is free. And in the case of University of Guyana, most of them must have taken student loans, and generous increases and so on. So the training component is still being borne largely by the state. The CG will tell you something more about some of the stuff that he has discovered, and Juanita is going to distribute this fly leaf for you at the end of the press conference. I'll tell you something that troubled me in this discourse is that they seem to have developed a narrative of good and bad. The public schools are bad, private schools are good. and why should we, in a sense, deny or subvert people's attempt to educate their children at private schools? I don't know that we are doing any such thing. All we're seeking to do is to apply a tax to garner income to cover expenditure projected in our budget. And I know again the issue of choice comes in, but like I said, we know that the public schools are not where they should be. That is not going to be an argument that any one of us is going to engage in. But I don't think anyone can deny that a lot has been done for public education over the years, and certainly we have continued that trend. This year, as I said in a piece that was published both in Kaicho News and Stabik News, that we're spending $43.1 billion of our budget in education, in the public education system. This is the highest share. Education sector has gotten the highest share of the budget. I think it's about 17% of the budget. And this is going to be going to a number of areas that I identified, including infrastructure improvement, numeracy and literacy skills improvement, school feeding programs, free uniform, free hot meals, and so on, an expansion of those hot meals and so on. I was in Washington last week, and part of my journey there was to negotiate a loan, which we did successfully, for the education, for education, both part going to UG, part going to the regular education system, where we're going to be building some more schools, looking at the curriculum development, looking at things like teaching methods and so on. So the public schools, there every attempt to improve public schools. And I think we ought to pay tribute to those teachers who are still in the school system, that they labor mightily under extreme conditions. And also, I think we should pay tribute to the parent-teachers associations, and also the old students and the other stakeholders who put in their bit to make these schools, the environment comfortable, and to make teaching worthy of its profession and vocation. So I was a bit troubled that this narrative that developed where public schools are bad, private schools are good, and it seems as if you can only get a good education if you go to a private school. Again, as I said, I don't want to follow that narrative to any conclusion, because I think that's a debate that could go on and on and on. Suffice to say that at the primary level is where a number of the private schools have excelled in the sense of measuring only by common entrance, and measuring only by those who are in the top 100 or the top whatever it is. I don't know that it says anything about all the other students who went to the school and obviously paid their money and who obviously expected to excel and didn't excel, And secondly, when those students graduate from their primary, where are they going to go at the secondary? How many private secondary schools are there? Those same students are going to go to QE's College, St. Stanislaus, Christ Church, St. John's College, Cummins Lodge Secondary. They're all going to go to more or less, most of them will be ending up in the same public school system that is being denigrated. And when they graduate from this public school system, most of them will end up into another public institution, University of Guyana. So I don't think it is helpful for any narrative to continue to denigrate one against the other as a means as to why you shouldn't be putting a tax on, say, private tuition. I believe it has to be borne in mind three things. One, education is available to everyone who needs it, who wants it. There's no barrier to education. And happily in Guyana, there's both public education and there's private education. Parents or children, if they can make that decision, will make their decision as to whether they want to go public or private. Each one has consequences, obviously. You go public, you save money from the private institution, and you're free to do with whatever you want with that money. Whether you want to pay for extra lessons for the children who are going public, or you want to spend it on whatever else you want. It's a choice you're making. You make a choice to go private, you use money that you would have saved if you go public, but you have other objectives in mind that you feel that are more important to you at that stage in your life or that stage in your child's life. But again, as I said, it's a choice you're making at that time. And you can't say that the government is circumscribing your choice by putting a tax on private tuition. I don't see how that can happen. You still have the choice. You still do have the choice. Because that argument, even if the government didn't put a tax, by the end of this semester or the next semester, the fees go up. The fees go up. So there's no, let's just say the government didn't have a tax. So you're paying $55,000 this year, the person will say, due to inflation, fees will have to go up to $60,000. So the $5,000 extra. Inflation is a tax in its own right. So the point, and you will still continue going to the school if you can afford it, by the way, at 60,000. But the government is not circumscribing private education, or you having a private education if you want, by us putting a tax on tuition fees. No, there's an argument which says that, well, they got a number of poor children. I don't know if the word was poor that is being used, who attend these private schools. Okay, let's say that that's an argument that holds a lot of water with it. And I asked the question in my missive to the press, should that then be a basis of removing the tax? Or shouldn't we find creative ways of getting around that? In other words, then isolate the poor students who are going to the private schools and see what can be done for them. Meanwhile, you're admitting that there are a large number of students who go to these schools who can comfortably afford it. At least that is in accordance with what I interpret the School of Nations director to be saying. And that he might be more concerned with those who can't. Well, as I indicated, one way of doing this is to go the GT&T, the CGIA route, which is to absorb, in the case of GT&T, they're going to absorb the full VAT on the data. Is it data or internet? Or, yes, or the internet or something. They're going to absorb the full VAT. The CGIA is going to absorb the full VAT. Schools could isolate these poor students, and they could work with the parents and say, look, I know you're poor, you're paying in your $100 and your $20 and so on. Maybe you carry X% of it, and we will carry the bulk Y% of it, and they will then absorb. Or maybe they can carry all right? Now, this is not a burden on the schools. This is not a burden on the schools. Like I said, in the case of GT&T, it's not an altruistic, gratuitous move. In one sense, perhaps it is. But what will happen is they will just write it down as a tax deductible. Right? It becomes an expense to them now. They just reduce the income that Mr. Station can tax. So it's a win-win for everybody. I don't know, when you look at it carefully, it's just a win-win for everybody. All right? Though the question is, if you're not paying any taxes, though, it becomes a lose for somebody. Right? Essentially, it will come a lose because you avoid paying taxes, you are lying low, not paying any, and to make a suggestion that you absorb the VAT would mean that I am eating into income which you should be paying, but you have had access to for the last how many years. So I really do think that one solution, and not the only solution, but one solution, I've proffered this solution, is to go the route of the GT&T CGIA. Isolate those who you think can't whose parents can't afford it, and call a meeting with them and discuss what percentage the school thinks it may be able to bear, and what they will to would like to the parent to bear. At 60,000, which let's say at 60,000, that means $8,400 over 3 months, which roughly works out to be $2,800 per month. Okay? I don't know. Maybe they could say, look, parent, why don't you carry $1,000? We will carry 1,800, or we will take up the 2,800 and we will ask Mr. Stacia to write it down as a tax deductible, or some combination of that, essentially. And I believe, quite frankly, everybody will be on a winning side. But to remove the tax, to remove a tax which we had carefully thought out, and which will bring income, we project to be in excess of 350 million, just conservatively, is to request us to look at other areas at a time when we have already indicated we are going to be borrowing $38 billion. So it's not that we have a fully financed budget from our taxes. We're borrowing. So either we upturn our economic program, which has consequences, or we continue to go on this path.